The lights of Riverside Park Stadium flared to life against the dusk sky, humming faintly as moths circled the towers. It was the first game of the season, and the town had turned out in droves, the bleachers rattling with chatter and the smell of popcorn drifting heavy on the warm spring air. From the outside, the stadium looked majestic, arched steel supports and brick walls lined with banners of past victories. But inside, closer to the field, the grass had patches that never seemed to grow, and the shadows beneath the stands were darker than they should have been, even with floodlights cutting across the diamond. Evan, a lanky 17-year-old usher, adjusted his red vest nervously. He'd taken the job for extra money and the promise of watching the games for free. First night jitters, his supervisor, a gruff ex-player named Donnelly, had said earlier, clapping him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, kid. Just keep the crowd happy and stay out of the tunnels. Trust me." Evan thought Donnelly was joking, but the warning lingered. By the third inning, the crowd was electric. The Riverside Falcons were up by 2, and every crack of the bat echoed like a rifle shot. Kids waved foam fingers. Evan found himself smiling, until he noticed something strange down the left field line. A dark shape. It wasn't a person, not exactly, but it was standing where no one was supposed to be, between the foul pole and the wall, just beyond the reach of the lights. Evan squinted. At first, he thought it was an equipment bag left behind, but the shape shifted slightly, like it was breathing. "Hey," Evan muttered under his breath, stepping toward the railing. "What the hell?" "See something, kid?" an older fan asked behind him. Evan turned back quickly. "No, just thought I did." When he looked again, the shape was gone. The field glistened green and empty under the stadium lights. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't left, it had only moved. By the 7th inning stretch, the night had cooled, and the stadium buzzed with drunken songs and the rhythmic stomp of feet on the bleachers. Evan was assigned to patrol near the lower concourse, checking tickets and making sure no one wandered where they shouldn't. The concrete halls beneath the seats were dimmer, cooler, and filled with the smell of stale beer and disinfectant. He passed a row of concession stands, shutters drawn, the staff having packed up early to join the crowd above. Only one man lingered down here, a janitor in an old gray uniform, mopping near the entrance to the service tunnel. Evan had never seen him before. "You lost, kid?" the janitor asked without looking up. His voice was gravel, low and deliberate. "No, just making rounds," Evan said, his sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. "Did you see anyone come down this way earlier? By the left field wall?" The janitor finally looked up. His eyes were too pale, nearly milky, and they didn't seem to focus properly. "A lot of things walk down there, son. Not all of 'em people." Evan laughed nervously. "That's a weird thing to say." The janitor's mop slapped against the floor, streaking dark water across the tiles. "Don't go in the tunnels. Donnelly should have told you that." Evan hesitated. "Why?" The janitor didn't answer right away. He leaned on his mop, head tilting as if he were listening to something distant. Finally, he said, "This stadium was built on top of bones. Folks don't talk about it much. They thought covering it with baseball and hot dogs would make people forget. But the ground remembers. And sometimes, the ground don't like being forgotten." A wave of applause roared from the stands above, shaking dust loose from the pipes overhead. When Evan looked back at the janitor, the man was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just the mop bucket standing alone in the middle of the hall, water rippling as though something had moved it seconds before. Evan swallowed hard. He wanted to ask Donnelly about it, but part of him worried that maybe he'd laugh, or worse, confirm it. Instead, Evan climbed the steps back toward the field. The Falcons had just clinched the win, and the crowd was on its feet, chanting. Fireworks shot into the night sky, painting the stadium in bursts of red and white. Everyone was celebrating. Everyone but Evan. Because just as the fireworks bloomed, he saw it again, down the left field line. The shape. Taller now. Closer. And this time, it was looking right at him. The fireworks died out, and the stadium began to empty. Parents wrangled tired kids, groups of teenagers took selfies by the scoreboard, and ushers like Evan guided people toward the exits. He should have been relieved, it was the easiest part of the job. But his eyes kept drifting back to left field, where the shadow had stood. Now the space looked empty again. Almost too empty. "Evan!" Donnelly barked from across the field entrance. "Quit daydreaming and help clear out Section C." Evan snapped back. "Right, sorry." He moved up the steps, herding stragglers with a polite, "Thanks for coming, folks, game's over." But even as he spoke, he noticed something strange. Near the back row, under the bleachers where the overhead lights didn't reach, something stirred. Not a fan, at least, not any fan he'd ever seen. A long, spindly hand gripped the metal railing. The fingers were too thin, the knuckles bulging like knots of wood. They tapped once, twice, as if drumming to a beat no one else could hear. Evan froze mid-step. "Sir? Ma'am? You're gonna have to," his voice cracked. The hand vanished. A group of college kids stumbled past him, laughing, oblivious. When Evan looked again, the shadow under the bleachers was gone. "Kid, you're white as a ghost," Donnelly muttered when Evan rejoined him near the dugout. He smelled of cigar smoke and sunflower seeds. "You okay?" "Yeah. I think I saw someone under the stands. Looked weird." Donnelly's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Section C. Back row." Forget it," Donnelly cut him off, too quickly. "Fans sneak in all the time, looking for a place to crash. Security'll sweep it." He clapped Evan's shoulder harder than necessary. "Don't go looking for trouble. Stadium's old. Plays tricks on you." But Evan wasn't convinced. As the final crowds drained away and the bright stadium lights powered down one by one, he kept glancing at the shadows. And just before the last light clicked off, he swore he saw movement again, something crawling along the underside of the bleachers, its limbs bending wrong, slipping deeper into the dark. By midnight, the stadium was nearly empty. Most of the staff had clocked out, leaving only a skeleton crew of security guards and maintenance workers. Evan had been asked to stay late to help lock up, which meant walking through the concourse alone, turning keys in gates that groaned louder than they should have. He tried not to think about the hand he'd seen under the bleachers. The stadium was different after hours, quieter, yes, but not peaceful. The silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the occasional metallic clang echoing through the steel supports above. Somewhere far off, a drain dripped steadily, like a slow heartbeat. He found himself near the service tunnel again, the place where he'd met the strange janitor. The mop bucket was still there, but the water inside had turned black, thick as oil. Evan shivered and looked away quickly. "Hey, rookie." The voice came from the tunnel. A man stepped into view, tall, wearing the same faded gray uniform the janitor had worn earlier. But something was wrong. His face looked younger now, smoother, but his pale eyes were the same cloudy white. "You shouldn't be here," the man said softly. "They're waking up." Evan's mouth went dry. "Who's waking up?" The man smiled. It wasn't comforting. "The ones beneath. Every season, they stir when the crowd stomps and cheers. The ground shakes. They think it's for them." Before Evan could respond, a heavy slam echoed deeper in the tunnel, like a door had been kicked open. The man's head snapped toward the noise. "You need to go," he hissed. "Now." But curiosity tugged harder than fear. Evan took a cautious step closer. "What's down there?" The man's expression hardened. "Graves that never stayed filled." The slam came again, closer this time. And under it, Evan heard something else, a faint scraping sound, like claws dragging across concrete. He backed away slowly, heart hammering, but the man didn't follow. He just stood at the tunnel's mouth, mop handle in hand like a weapon, pale eyes fixed on the dark. "Run," the man whispered. Evan didn't argue. He bolted back up the steps, out toward the quiet concourse. But as he reached the top, he swore he heard voices drifting up from below, low, guttural chants in a language that made his stomach twist. And the worst part? They sounded like they were getting closer. By the time Evan reached the field level again, the place felt deserted. The bleachers loomed like a hollow skeleton, and the infield was eerily perfect, its chalk lines glowing faintly in the dim security lights. A breeze slipped across the diamond, carrying the faint smell of damp earth, odd, since it hadn't rained in weeks. Evan tried to shake it off. He just had to finish his last sweep and then he could go home. But his route led him past the dugout, and something there made him freeze. The door to the Falcon's dugout was ajar. A thin strip of light glowed from inside. "Hello?" Evan called, his voice cracking in the emptiness. "Security?" No answer. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The dugout smelled wrong, like mold and wet stone, not dirt and leather like it should. Helmets sat in their racks, bats leaned against the wall, but the light wasn't coming from a lamp. It was seeping up through the cracks in the floorboards, faintly green, as if the earth itself glowed beneath. Evan crouched, fingertips brushing the boards. The wood was warm. Then, without warning, a sound rattled the dugout bench, knuckles drumming against wood, steady and deliberate. Tap. 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 Evan's heart pounded. "Who's there?" From the far corner, a voice whispered back. Low. Dry. Like air leaking from a coffin. "Play ball." Evan jerked upright, stumbling into a helmet rack. The clatter echoed through the empty stadium. He turned toward the corner, nothing. Just shadows. Then the bench creaked. Something was sitting there now. He couldn't see its face, but he could see the outline, long arms bent wrong, shoulders hunched, legs stretching too far down. The thing tilted its head at him, bone-pale fingers tapping the bench in rhythm. Tap. 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 "Back away," Evan whispered to himself, forcing his legs to move. He edged toward the dugout door, refusing to blink. But the thing moved faster than he thought possible. One moment it was sitting, the next, it crouched at the floorboards, clawed hands pressed flat against the glowing cracks. And then the wood began to splinter. The green light flared. The sound of voices rose again, hundreds of whispers, layered over each other, hissing in that same twisted language. Evan bolted, shoving the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. He sprinted across the field, his footsteps echoing too loud in the emptiness. He didn't dare look back. But he didn't need to. Because behind him, from the dugout, came the sound of wood breaking, boards snapping open like brittle bones. And something climbing out. Evan tore across the outfield, lungs burning, sneakers slipping on the dew-slick grass. The stadium's vastness, which had felt comforting with fans cheering hours earlier, now seemed endless. Every shadow stretched too far, and every echo seemed to belong to someone, or something, just a step behind him. He glanced back once. The dugout glowed like a furnace, green light spilling onto the diamond. A figure was crawling out of the broken boards, dragging itself with jerky, spider-like movements. Its limbs were too long, too thin, its skin the same pallid gray as old ash. But its face was worse. It looked like a mask made of stitched leather, with empty holes where eyes should be. And it was fast. Shit, Evan gasped, vaulting over the low wall that separated the field from the first row of seats. His shin scraped hard against metal, but he didn't stop. The thing's claws raked the wall behind him, shrieking sparks into the dark. He darted into the concourse, slamming a gate shut behind him. The clang echoed like a gunshot. For a moment, he thought it might hold. He crouched low, gasping, listening. Tap. 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 The sound of its fingers, drumming against metal. Testing it. Then, silence. Evan held his breath. The concourse stretched empty ahead, littered with crushed soda cups and crumpled hot dog wrappers. He started moving slowly, trying not to make a sound. Every step echoed anyway. Behind him, the gate screeched. Metal bent like tinfoil. No, 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 Evan whispered, breaking into a sprint. He darted past shuttered concession stands, past souvenir shops locked behind iron grates. Somewhere above, a lone floodlight flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. He rounded a corner toward the stairwell. If he could just make it up to the street level. The shadow was already waiting at the top of the stairs. It clung to the wall like a lizard, head cocked unnaturally, its hollow eye holes fixed on him. Evan stumbled backward, chest heaving. "What do you want?" he shouted, voice cracking. The thing tilted its head further. And then, in that dry coffin voice, it rasped. "We play ball." It lunged. Evan barely had time to react. He hurled himself sideways, the creature's claws slamming into the concrete where he'd been standing a second earlier. Sparks flared, the stairwell trembling under its weight. Evan scrambled up the opposite set of steps, taking them two at a time, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The upper concourse stretched before him like a hollowed-out canyon. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing in uneven pulses that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. He sprinted past rows of shuttered beer stands, their glass fronts reflecting his pale, panicked face. Tap. 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 The sound followed, echoing everywhere at once. He couldn't tell if it was behind him, above him, or crawling along the ceiling. "Help!" he yelled, voice cracking against the concrete walls. "Anybody?" His cry bounced back to him, warped, too slow, as if the stadium itself were mocking him. No guards, no janitors, just him and the thing. He ducked into a souvenir shop alcove, pressing his back against the grate. His chest heaved. Maybe he'd lost it. Maybe. A row of bobbleheads on the shelf inside began to shake. One toppled over, then another. The whole row rattled violently, as though something massive were moving just behind the walls. Evan bolted again. His shoes squeaked on the polished floor, the sound too loud, too desperate. The concourse curved, and for a moment he saw an exit sign glowing red at the far end. Hope surged. Street level. Safety. Then he saw it. The shadow peeled itself out of the wall ahead, limbs unfolding like a spider uncoiling. Its eyeless mask turned toward him. Evan skidded to a stop, panic rising in his throat. He spun, looking for another way, and spotted a service door halfway down the concourse. He didn't think, he just ran for it. The creature screeched, a sound like metal tearing, and launched after him. Evan shoved the service door open and slammed it shut behind him just as claws raked the steel. The door shook violently, denting inward. He staggered into darkness. The service stairwell smelled of rust and damp stone. At the bottom was another door, heavy and iron. Faded paint above it read, "Storage, tunnel access." Every instinct screamed at him not to go down there. But the pounding on the door above made the choice for him. Evan grabbed the railing and descended into the dark. The stairwell swallowed him, each step creaking under his weight. The pounding on the door above grew fainter until it was replaced by silence, worse, heavier silence that seemed alive. Evan gripped the rail so tightly his knuckles hurt, his breath shallow as he reached the bottom. The iron door loomed before him. Its paint had peeled away in jagged flakes, revealing corroded metal beneath. A heavy padlock dangled from the latch, but it was already broken, twisted apart like soft clay. Someone, or something, had already gone inside. Evan hesitated. His brain screamed to turn back, but his body moved anyway. He pushed the door, and it swung open with a groan that echoed forever. The tunnel stretched ahead, a low stone corridor lined with rusted pipes. The air was thick and humid, tinged with mold and something coppery, blood, maybe. The floor sloped downward, leading deeper under the stadium. His footsteps splashed in shallow puddles. Every sound bounced back at him, warped, as though the tunnel itself whispered in reply. "Don't go in the tunnels," Donnelly's voice replayed in his head. "Trust me." But it was too late. He passed a storage alcove where crates of old uniforms and broken bats sat stacked, forgotten. The bats were cracked, but each bore deep gouges, as if something had chewed through them. Further on, the walls changed. The brick gave way to older stone, uneven blocks, damp with centuries of moisture. Strange carvings marked their surface, circles, spirals, jagged symbols that made his eyes ache if he stared too long. The whispers grew louder. Not echoes, voices. He froze, pressing himself against the wall. From around the bend came the shuffle of bare feet on wet stone. Then more, dozens, maybe hundreds, all moving in unison. A chant rose, low, guttural, the same language he'd heard before above the dugout. Evan's stomach churned. He couldn't understand the words, but the rhythm was unmistakable. Tap. 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 He edged forward just enough to see. The tunnel widened into a vast underground chamber, lit by that same green glow that had seeped through the dugout floorboards. In the center was a pit, its edges lined with broken bats, helmets, even torn jerseys, offerings. Figures stood around it, hunched and skeletal, their faces hidden by stitched masks. Their clawed fingers drummed the ground in unison. And from the pit itself, something was rising. Something huge. Evan clapped a hand over his mouth, forcing back a scream. Evan pressed himself flat against the cold stone wall, heart pounding so loud he swore they'd hear it. The chamber below was a living nightmare, dozens of masked figures kneeling, their clawed hands drumming in perfect rhythm. The sound reverberated through the chamber, crawling up his bones. Tap. 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 The pit glowed brighter, the green light pulsing like a heartbeat. Slowly, something emerged, an arm first, impossibly long, with fingers like splintered bats. Then a second, clawing into the dirt to hoist its bulk higher. What rose was no human shape. It was hunched, skinless, ribs exposed like jagged cage bars. Its head was nothing but a stitched leather mask, stretched too tight across a skull with no eyes, no nose, just a maw of teeth grinding silently. The kneeling figures swayed in unison, whispering their chants. Evan's stomach turned. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs refused to move. His eyes darted across the chamber, searching for another exit. To the far side, he spotted an archway leading deeper underground. Maybe if he moved slowly. A voice hissed right behind his ear. "He's here." Evan spun around, choking on his scream. One of them had slipped into the tunnel behind him, masked, drumming its fingers against the wall, tilting its head like a curious child. The drumming in the chamber stopped. Dozens of heads snapped toward him in unison. The chants cut off mid-breath, leaving only silence and the wet scrape of claws on stone. Evan bolted. He sprinted into the chamber, weaving between the masked things as their claws reached for him. Their movements were jerky, twitching, like puppets pulled by tangled strings. He didn't dare look back, he only aimed for the archway, the only hope. One figure lunged, claws raking his shoulder. Pain flared, hot and sharp. He stumbled but kept running. The pit bellowed. A sound so deep it rattled his teeth. The hulking thing within shifted, dragging itself higher, its maw stretching into a smile made only of teeth. Evan dove through the archway as claws snapped shut inches from his throat. He scrambled to his feet, the green glow fading behind him as he ran deeper into the black. But the voices followed. "Play ball. Play ball." The chant crawled after him like smoke, growing louder with every step. Evan ran until his lungs screamed, the chant echoing behind him. The tunnel split into passages that bent and twisted, but he didn't care, he just kept moving, following the faintest hint of air movement that might lead to escape. His foot caught on a loose stone. He crashed hard into a metal door half sunken into the wall. The impact rattled it open, and he tumbled inside. The smell hit him first. Sweat. Mold. Rust. He staggered to his feet and realized where he was, an old locker room. Rows of rusted metal lockers lined the walls, their doors hanging crooked. A cracked mirror stretched across one side, reflecting his pale, terrified face. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming a pool that spread across the cracked tile floor. For a moment, it was quiet. Evan slumped against a bench, trying to slow his breathing. His shoulder burned where the claws had raked him, blood soaking through his red usher's vest. He pulled the fabric aside and winced. For deep gouges carved across his skin, raw and angry. He muttered to himself, "Get out. Just get out." The mirror flickered. He froze. His reflection wasn't moving like he was. While Evan hunched on the bench, his reflection straightened, head cocked at an angle too sharp for a human neck. Slowly, it lifted its hand and tapped the glass. Tap. 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 Evan scrambled back, heart hammering. No. No, no. The mirror spiderwebbed with cracks. From behind the glass, something pale pressed forward, a hand, fingers too long, nails black and splintered. The surface bulged outward, as if the mirror were only water holding it back. Evan grabbed a rusted bat leaning against the lockers, swinging with all his strength. The mirror shattered, raining shards across the floor. The hand withdrew, but the pieces didn't fall still. In each fragment, faces stared back, stitched masks, rows of teeth, eyeless sockets. The drumming started again, this time from inside the lockers. Tap. 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 One by one, the metal doors rattled, shaking violently. Something inside was trying to get out. Evan backed toward the door, bat trembling in his grip. His shoes splashed in the shallow water, each ripple catching the faint green glow that seemed to seep from nowhere. The first locker burst open. A masked figure spilled out, jerking like a marionette, water streaming off its body as if it had been drowning inside. Then another locker opened. And another. Evan didn't wait to see how many. He bolted back into the tunnels, the sound of metal doors slamming open behind him as the things gave chase. The tunnel seemed to close in around Evan as he sprinted, every step echoing like a gunshot. The sound of pursuit was deafening, the slosh of wet footsteps, claws scraping stone, the rhythmic tap, tap, tap chasing him through every twist and turn. He whipped around a corner and nearly lost his footing on the slick ground. The walls here were tighter, the ceiling lower, and the air heavier with rot. His shoulder screamed with pain, the wound leaving a dark smear along the stone where he brushed past. Behind him, the masked figures crawled more than they ran, limbs bending backward, jerking against the walls like spiders in a frenzy. Their stitched faces tilted in unison, empty holes staring at him. "Leave me alone!" Evan shouted, swinging the rusted bat blindly as he ran. The metal rang against the stone, sparks flaring, but it did nothing to slow them. The tunnel forked again. Without thinking, Evan dove left, bursting into a wide chamber. He skidded to a stop. This one looked like an abandoned office. Old filing cabinets rusted in the corners, and a desk sat in the middle, its drawers torn open. On the wall, yellowed papers hung by rusted nails, blueprints of the stadium. The edges were water-stained, but Evan could make out crude circles drawn in thick black marker beneath the bleachers, dugouts, and concession stands. Sacred sites. He didn't have time to study them. The drumming grew louder, echoing closer. He turned toward the far side of the room, another door. He dashed for it, fumbling at the handle. It gave way just as the first figure lurched into the chamber behind him. Evan slammed the door, throwing the lock, and stumbled into another narrow passage. He pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. Then, bang. The door shook violently. Again. The wood splintered. He staggered backward, gripping the bat, his whole body trembling. The pounding stopped. For a moment, he thought they'd given up. Then a voice, muffled but clear, hissed through the cracks. "Play ball." The lock snapped. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. Figures poured through, crawling on all fours, their claws sparking against stone as they rushed him. Evan screamed and ran deeper into the black. Evan sprinted blindly, every muscle burning. His breath came in ragged gasps, the tunnel spinning around him like a maze with no end. The voices chased him, whispering, chanting, their claws striking sparks that briefly lit the black. He rounded another bend and tripped over a pile of debris. His bat clattered away, and he hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his ribs. He clawed at the wet floor, scrambling upright, only to freeze. Someone was standing ahead. At first, his heart seized in terror, but then he saw the gray uniform. The janitor. The same pale-eyed man from before, leaning on his mop as though this were all routine. "You again," Evan gasped, staggering toward him. "You have to help me, there." The man raised a hand, silencing him. His cloudy eyes flicked past Evan. "Don't look back." Evan swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn. He could feel them behind him, could hear their low, guttural breathing. "Follow me," the janitor said, his voice steady, almost gentle. Without waiting, he moved into a narrow side passage, his mop tapping softly against the ground. Evan hesitated for half a second, then lunged after him. The passage was so tight the walls scraped his shoulders, the ceiling dripping icy water down his neck. Behind him, claws screeched against stone as the creatures tried to wedge themselves into the tunnel. The janitor walked calmly, never looking back. His pace was steady, almost leisurely, as though he knew they wouldn't be caught. "This place is older than the team, older than the town," he murmured. "They buried the first ones under here. Thought concrete and steel could keep them down." Evan nearly tripped again. "What are they? What do they want?" "They want the game to go on," the janitor said. His pale eyes glimmered in the dim green glow seeping from the cracks in the walls. "The crowd wakes them. The cheers feed them. Every pitch, every stomp on the bleachers, it's worship. And they've been starving all winter." The passage opened into another chamber. Unlike the others, this one wasn't carved from stone but bricked carefully, like an old wine cellar. Rows of wooden benches lined the room, facing a single dusty podium. Faded scorecards lay scattered across the benches. A chapel. The janitor stopped in the doorway, leaning on his mop. This is where they began. The first players. The first sacrifices. Evan's skin crawled. "You're telling me this stadium is built on a graveyard?" The janitor finally looked at him fully, his milky eyes unreadable. "No, son. It is the graveyard." Behind them, the drumming started again, closer now. Tap. 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 The air in the chapel was thick with mildew and dust, the kind that clung to your throat and made every breath feel heavy. Evan's eyes darted across the benches, the old scorecards, the faint carvings in the brick walls, names, initials, tally marks etched by hands that had sat in these seats decades, maybe centuries ago. The janitor closed the door behind them with a slow creak, dragging his mop across the floor. He leaned it against the podium like a priest laying down his staff. "They'll come," he said. "But this place holds them back, for a time." Evan's voice trembled. "What do they want with me?" The janitor's pale eyes softened. "They don't want you. They want what you carry. Your voice, your cheer, your life. Every fan who ever sat in those stands gave them something. Most never knew. But sometimes, the debt comes due." Evan backed away, shaking his head. No, I didn't ask for this. I just came to watch a game." "You stayed after dark," the janitor said flatly. "That's when the contract shifts. The living become players whether they want to or not." The drumming grew louder outside the chapel door. Tap. 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 It wasn't just claws now, there were voices chanting low, like an audience waiting for the first pitch. Evan's skin prickled as he realized the rhythm sounded like a stadium chant, the same one the crowd had roared that afternoon. The janitor placed his hand on the podium and whispered words Evan didn't recognize. The carvings in the brick walls shimmered faintly, glowing like chalk lines under stadium lights. "Sit," the janitor said, gesturing to the front bench. Evan shook his head. No, I want out. I'm leaving. You leave now, and the game swallows you whole, the janitor said, his voice dropping to a rasp. But if you sit, if you listen, I can show you the rules. And maybe you'll survive tonight. The chanting outside grew into a roar, the sound of thousands of unseen throats. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the creatures battered against the door. Evan hesitated, his heart hammering. He glanced at the exit, then at the janitor, then at the benches carved with names. The old man's pale eyes fixed on him. First rule, son, once you step onto their field, there's no going home. The door shuddered violently. The game was about to begin. The door to the chapel splintered with a deafening crack. Evan stumbled backward as claws pushed through the wood, curling inward like hooks tearing flesh. The chanting roared into a frenzy, thousands of phantom voices crying his name, urging him onto the field. The janitor didn't flinch. He raised his mop like a staff, bristles pointing at the door, and barked something guttural. For a moment, the carvings in the wall flared white-hot, halting the invasion. The claws hissed, retreating slightly. Too late, the janitor muttered. They've chosen you. The door burst wide open. Shadows poured inside, not just shapes, but solid, crawling things. Their faces looked like old baseball masks melted into skin, with jagged teeth where the mouth guards should have been. They skittered forward, clicking like insects, their joints bending wrong. Evan screamed, bolting for the far side of the chapel, but one creature was faster. Its masked face opened wide, gnashing teeth snapping just inches from his ankle. Evan kicked wildly, his sneaker striking hard against its jaw with a crack. The creature shrieked, retreating with the sound of splintered wood. The janitor slammed his mop into the ground, and the carvings along the walls blazed brighter. Field set, he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. Inning 1. Evan blinked, and suddenly, the chapel was gone. He stood in the middle of a baseball diamond. The air smelled of dirt and blood. Stadium lights hummed above, though the stands were filled not with people, but with shadows, shifting, faceless masses. They roared in unison, chanting like a crowd possessed. Evan clutched his chest, gasping. What is this? The janitor was beside him, no longer holding a mop but a warped bat with nails driven through the barrel. His face looked gaunt, stretched, like he'd aged a decade in seconds. The game, he said. They've called you up. Better swing, or you won't make it past the first pitch. From the dugout emerged figures in tattered uniforms. Their jerseys bore no team names, only numbers that dripped black ink. Their eyes glowed through cracked catcher's masks, and each carried a bat carved from bone. Evan staggered backward. I can't play. I don't even. The janitor shoved a bat into his hands, the wood cold and damp. Then learned fast. The pitcher stepped onto the mound. Its arm dangled too long, its glove stitched from leather that looked disturbingly human. It grinned with rows of shattered teeth, wound up, and hurled the ball. Evan braced himself as it screamed through the air, not a baseball at all but a seething, burning mass of teeth and eyes. The game had begun. The ball shrieked as it spun toward Evan, jaws snapping open midair. For a heartbeat he froze, staring at its rows of grinding teeth, then instinct seized him. He swung the bat with every ounce of fear-driven strength. Crack. The thing exploded into a spray of black tar and bone fragments, splattering across the infield dirt. The crowd erupted in a guttural cheer, their faceless heads jerking. Back in unison as if pulled by invisible strings. Evan stumbled in the batter's box, his hands trembling, bile rising in his throat. That's it, the janitor barked, gripping Evan's shoulder. Don't let it touch you. Not once. The pitcher bent backward unnaturally, bones popping as it prepared the next throw. This time the ball wasn't teeth, it writhed like a sack of rats, squealing as it spun through the air. Evan swung late. The ball slammed into the catcher's mitt behind him, bursting open. A wave of vermin spilled across the dirt, racing for his legs. Evan screamed and hopped back, kicking at them wildly. The catcher dropped his mitt and let the rats chew their way up his arms. His mask tilted as he whispered in a voice like static, "Strike one." The scoreboard above the stadium flickered on. Glowing red numbers blazed, 0 to 1. Evan's stomach dropped. This was no dream. It was being kept, tallied, watched. "Eyes on the pitcher," the janitor shouted. "One more strike, and they'll drag you out of the box." The crowd banged against the stands, chanting Evan's name now, long, drawn out, distorted, "Evan! Evan!" The pitcher wound again. This time the ball screamed like a baby as it soared forward, its mouth wide, arms flailing from its round body. Evan's chest clenched. He swung too soon, the bat slicing empty air. The ball hit his shoulder, biting down with tiny hands and teeth. Pain tore through him. Evan shrieked and ripped it free, hurling it across the dirt where it burst into ash. "Strike two." The catcher's voice echoed like a funeral bell. Evan dropped to one knee, clutching his shoulder, sweat running cold down his face. I can't do this. I'm not a player." The janitor loomed over him, his shadow stretching unnaturally long across the diamond. "Doesn't matter what you are. You've been drafted. And if you don't swing like you mean it, you'll never leave this field alive." The pitcher grinned wider, winding its arm until the bone split from the skin. It hurled the next ball, a black, writhing sphere that pulsed like a heart. The crowd fell silent. This was the final pitch. The ball throbbed as it sailed toward him, its wet, meaty pulse loud enough to drown out the roaring crowd. Evan felt it in his chest like a second heartbeat, syncing with his own. Each thud echoed through his ribs, telling him don't swing, let it in. He tightened his grip on the bat until his knuckles cracked. No, I'm not part of this," he shouted, though the words were drowned by the deafening hum that radiated from the scoreboard above. The janitor barked, "Now, kid, swing." Evan shut his eyes and swung blind. The bat connected with a wet crunch. The ball split open midair, spraying the field in streams of black-red ichor. From within, something small and skeletal unfurled, like a fetus made of charred wood and smoke. It screeched, rising above the diamond, its shrill cry rattling the metal bleachers. The crowd went wild, clapping in unison, faceless palms smacking together like slabs of raw meat. The thing writhed in the sky for a moment before crumbling to ash. The scoreboard blinked, red numbers flashing. Hit. Evan collapsed onto the dirt, gasping for breath. His shoulder throbbed from the earlier bite, his arms heavy with exhaustion. "You bought yourself another inning," the janitor muttered, kneeling beside him. His voice had shifted, less gravel, more echo, like it was coming from a tunnel. "Don't get comfortable. 9 innings is a long way to go." Evan turned on him, voice hoarse. 9 innings? You mean I have to play the whole damn game? The janitor's yellowed eyes glimmered in the floodlights. "Every game has rules. And every rule here is written in blood." The umpire shuffled from behind the plate, his mask a cracked iron cage. He slammed the butt of his staff into the dirt, and the ground shuddered beneath Evan's knees. "Side retired," the umpire croaked, voice like breaking glass. "Take the field." "What?" Evan blinked up at him. The janitor grabbed him by the arm, hauling him to his feet. "You heard him. You bat, then you field. That's the order. And if you don't, they'll eat you alive." As Evan staggered toward the dugout, he glanced back at the stands. The faceless crowd leaned forward in perfect synchronicity, tilting their heads at him. Not one broke formation. Their hollow mouths moved as one, whispering a single word that made his skin crawl. Defense. The stadium lights buzzed brighter, almost blinding. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the field as the opposing team trotted from the dugout. Their uniforms were pristine white, but their bodies beneath were anything but. Skinless arms. Hollowed rib cages. Heads with no eyes, only dripping sockets. And they carried bats like bones. The janitor shoved a glove into Evan's hand. "First inning's over. Now it's their turn at bat." Don't drop a single ball, kid, or you won't get another chance. Evan stared down at the glove, then at the creatures taking their places at home plate. The world swayed, his stomach curdled, and the weight of the rules pressed down harder than gravity itself. This wasn't just a game. It was a trial. And inning one had only just ended. The grass under Evan's cleats felt wrong, too soft, too uneven, like he was stepping across stretched skin instead of turf. Every step sank a little too deep, as though something beneath was pressing back. The janitor shoved him toward left field. Out there, kid. Don't let anything drop. Not a single one. Evan tried to steady his breathing, scanning the darkened stadium. The faceless crowd leaned forward, silent now, their pale heads tilted at identical angles as though waiting for the first taste of blood. The opposing batter stepped into the box. His jersey clung to a body of exposed muscle, veins pumping sluggish black fluid. His bat wasn't wood, it was a length of femur, still stained at one end. He pointed it straight toward Evan and left, then dragged it across his throat in a slow, deliberate gesture. The umpire raised his cracked iron mask. Play ball. The pitcher, one of the faceless figures, lurched forward, his wind-up grotesque, spine bending too far, arms stretching longer than humanly possible. He hurled something that sizzled as it cut through the air. It wasn't a ball. It was a skull. The batter swung, and the skull shattered into fragments mid-flight. The pieces rained down across the outfield like jagged hail. Evan ducked, raising his glove instinctively. One shard struck the leather with such force it nearly knocked him over. The crowd erupted in wild, wordless cheering, their palms slapping the railings in a frenzy. Evan's chest heaved. What the hell, this isn't baseball, this is. Catch everything, the janitor's voice barked from the dugout, distorted and distant, though Evan swore the man wasn't shouting. Doesn't matter what they throw. Doesn't matter what they swing. You drop one, and you become one of them. Evan swallowed hard. His glove dripped black fluid where the shard had melted into the leather, smoking faintly. He ripped it off and threw it down, shaking his hand as it burned. The skin of his palm tingled, veins rising like worms beneath the surface. Strike one, the umpire bellowed, his voice vibrating through the ground. The batter didn't flinch. He rolled his head back until his neck cracked and readied the femur bat again. The next pitch screamed through the air, a blur of motion. When the bone connected, the sound wasn't wood on leather, it was thunder. A lump of flesh, wet and squirming, arced high into the night sky, spiraling toward Evan. It pulsed midair, like a heart beating outside a body. Evan staggered back, gloveless, instinct screaming at him to run. But the crowd leaned forward in unison, whispering his name without mouths, Evan. Evan. The ball heart came down fast. With no glove, he threw out his bare hands. The impact nearly broke his fingers, the thing slick and alive in his grip. It writhed violently, trying to burrow into his wrists, tiny teeth forming along its seams. Don't drop it, the janitor's voice thundered, everywhere at once. Evan squeezed with everything he had, crushing the thing until it burst. Black ichor sprayed across his face, burning his eyes, blinding him in agony. He screamed and staggered backward, but the crowd's cheer turned into a chant, safe. 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 The batter dropped his femur bat and tilted his eyeless face skyward, as though smiling. And the inning wasn't even close to over. Evan staggered, vision swimming from the black ichor burning his eyes. He rubbed at them desperately, but the liquid smeared instead of clearing. The world around him pulsed like a bruise, sky flickering, the faceless crowd blurring into a wall of pale flesh. Then, through the haze, he heard the metallic rasp of the umpire's voice. Ball 2. Another pitch left the mound. This time it wasn't a skull, or flesh, it was a writhing bundle of something, squealing like a piglet as it spun through the air. When the bat struck, the thing split into a rain of wings. Dozens, hundreds, of torn, bloody wings fluttered apart, each twitching as if they still longed for flight. They drifted toward left field like a snowfall of skin. No, 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 Evan whispered, throwing his arms up. The wings clung to him, their undersides sticky with blood, latching onto his shirt, his face, his hair. Each carried weight far heavier than it looked. By the time 10 were on him, he felt like he was drowning beneath sandbags. The crowd began to laugh, a sound like 1,000 knives scraping glass. He tore at the wings, ripping them off in handfuls, only for more to fall. His knees buckled, body collapsing into the turf that no longer felt like grass but spongy flesh. It flexed beneath him, as if delighted. From the dugout, the janitor's silhouette stood unnaturally tall now, looming like a watchtower. His voice was warped, yet oddly calm. "Stay on your feet, boy. Outfielders don't kneel." Evan screamed through clenched teeth, forcing himself upright under the weight of the bloody wings. He staggered, his legs trembling, but he stayed up. "Safe," the umpire roared. The wings shriveled all at once, curling like paper in fire until nothing remained but smoke. Evan collapsed to one knee, gasping for air. He thought it was over, until he heard the crack of another swing. This time, what came flying wasn't an object. It was a child. A boy no older than 7, wearing a tiny uniform with stains so dark they might have been years old. His body cartwheeled through the night sky, limbs flailing helplessly, mouth frozen in a silent scream. He came down straight toward Evan, who froze, heart punching his ribs. "Catch him," the janitor whispered, though now his voice wasn't encouragement, it was command. Evan caught the boy, knees buckling from the impact. The child's body felt real, bones pressing through skin, lungs heaving against his chest. For a second, Evan thought he had saved him. Then the boy's face peeled away like wet paper, revealing a black pit where features should be. It screamed, a shriek so loud the stadium lights shattered, plunging the field into pitch black. Evan dropped him out of instinct. The second the boy hit the ground, he burst like rotten fruit. Chunks of meat sprayed across Evan's legs, searing through his jeans. The faceless crowd roared, not in anger this time, but in ecstasy. Evan fell backward, sobbing, as the umpire lifted both arms. "You dropped it." The crowd chanted with him, every voice in perfect rhythm. "Dropped it. Dropped it. Dropped it." And under the ground, the turf shivered, like the entire outfield was about to open up and swallow him whole. The chanting of dropped it rattled in Evan's skull until he thought his teeth would crack from the vibration. He staggered, clutching his ears, but the voices seeped in anyway. The turf beneath his knees trembled again, not like grass in the wind but like muscle twitching. He scrambled to his feet as the outfield rippled outward in every direction. The neat green expanse of grass seemed to stretch, bulge, then split open in jagged seams. Beneath it wasn't dirt. It was flesh. Raw, red muscle churned beneath a thin membrane of grass, flexing like it had been hiding just under the surface all along. Blood seeped upward, mixing with the dirt, turning the diamond into something slick. "Keep your stance, outfielder," the janitor called from the dugout, his voice reverberating like it was coming from a drainpipe. "The game isn't over until the field decides it's over." "The field?" Evan began, but his words were cut short. Something pushed up from the center field wall. At first it looked like a mound of earth swelling upward, but as it rose higher, Evan realized it was a spine. A massive vertebrae column broke through the soil, slick with blood, arching skyward until it towered over the scoreboard. Each segment cracked into place with a sickening snap, as if something colossal was dragging itself upright. The crowd roared approval. Evan stumbled back, eyes wide. What is this place?" No answer came. Instead, the ground beneath his cleats split, and dozens of pale arms shot out from the turf. They weren't reaching at random, they were reaching for him. Fingers brushed his ankles, cold and strong, dragging him down. He kicked and stomped, breaking brittle wrists, but more hands kept bursting through. They clawed up chunks of flesh grass, leaving raw patches of exposed muscle behind. The umpire raised his mask, revealing nothing underneath but an abyss. His voice boomed through the darkened stadium. "Outfield is alive. Defense must hold." The hands grabbed harder, pulling Evan down to his knees. He screamed, trying to tear free, but each arm was like rope, tightening with every second. From the mound, the pitcher raised another ball. No, not a ball. A head. Its jaw moved as if still alive, teeth clicking, tongue writhing. The bat cracked against it, and the head hurtled toward Evan. He couldn't move. Couldn't dodge. The arms held him tight. The head slammed into his chest. For one horrible second, it stuck there, its skin melting into his shirt, its mouth gnawing at his ribs. Evan shrieked as teeth broke through flesh. He tore it off with both hands, hurling it away, chunks of his own bloodied skin peeling with it. The faceless crowd erupted into wild, frenzied applause. Evan staggered, drenched in sweat and blood, staring at the thing writhing on the field. He realized then, with absolute clarity, this wasn't just a nightmare. This was a game. And the field wasn't on his side. The towering spine in center field cracked higher, vertebrae after vertebrae stacking toward the sky. Muscle and sinew wove between them, snapping taut like ropes pulled too tight. With a sickening lurch, it bent forward, its shadow draping across the diamond like a curtain. The faceless crowd held its approval, stamping their feet so hard the bleachers shook. Evan staggered backward toward the dugout, but the janitor stepped out into the aisle before him. His coveralls dripped with blood that hadn't been there before, mop in one hand, eyes black pits like the umpire's. "You can't quit, son," the janitor said, voice hollow, reverberating as though spoken through the stadium speakers. "Every game goes to the last inning. You're up." Evan shook his head violently. "No, I'm done, I'm not playing anymore." But the umpire raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at him. "Batter. Step up." The bat, slick with gore, rattled where it lay near home plate. Against his will, Evan's feet dragged forward. The arms that had grabbed him from the outfield re-emerged along the base paths, guiding him like cruel coaches. He stumbled into the batter's box. The pitcher stood waiting, his body unraveling, face collapsing inward. Where his chest should have been, there was only a yawning, tooth-ring pit. He wound up. The spine creature behind the outfield wall leaned forward, its hollow skull cracking into a grotesque grin. Its voice shook the stadium. Swing. The pitch came screaming toward Evan. Not a ball this time, something worse. It was his own reflection, twisted, snarling, its eyes hollowed out. It spun through the air, screaming his name in voices that weren't his own. Evan lifted the bat. Every bone in his body begged him not to, but his arms moved anyway. Crack. The stadium exploded with sound as the reflection shattered like glass, fragments of himself scattering across the diamond. Each shard screamed as it hit the ground, forming dozens of tiny, broken Evans that crawled across the dirt, teeth snapping, hands clawing. The crowd roared. The scoreboard flashed final inning, home, 0, away, 0, then, in blood-red digits, a new line appeared. Player, Evan, outs left, 0. The ground split wide beneath home plate. Beneath the turf wasn't soil, it was the abyss, vast and endless. The arms surged upward again, hundreds this time, dragging him downward. Evan screamed, flailing, but the bat slipped from his hands. It clattered uselessly across the plate as his chest sank into the dark. His last sight was the janitor leaning over him, expression almost pitying. "Game's over," the janitor said softly. "And you never stood a chance." The field swallowed him whole. The lights of the stadium flickered once, twice, then died, plunging everything into silence. When morning came, the seats were empty, the grass immaculate, and the scoreboard blank. As though no game had ever been played.